Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where by now you know we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And I could not be more excited to have this conversation with Crystal so that all of you can listen, podcast listeners, because Crystal, I don't know where this is going to go. And that's the beauty of getting real, right? So let me just introduce my friend and today's guest, Crystal Chambers, who I met in 2022 in California at NLP training. We spent a couple weeks together, and we'll talk more about that as we go. But just so you know a little bit about Crystal, she is deeply passionate about the transformative power of emotional and mental healing, a journey that began in her early 20s. Her initial interest in behavioral psychology not only improved her professional abilities, but also sparked a lifelong fascination with human behavior. And she is now in this space of creating something brand new, which I had never thought about, Crystal, until we talked last week, using virtual reality to help people visualize the things that they need to overcome.
Yes.
Just get better about things, right? So that's a really broad brush stroke, but I know you're going to tell us more. So the company is called Sheepdog Therapeutics, and Crystal's coming to us today from Wichita, Kansas. So welcome, Crystal.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Wait, Jody, you never thought of it?
I mean, I didn't think of how virtual reality could be used to do. No, it just didn't occur to me.
So I think it was such a natural progression for me because in all of our NLP work we do, it's imagination based,
Mhm.
right? And so I've learned a lot about myself through for a very long time, but even through this process. And look, I don't know that I'm totally on board with this idea, but there's something called aphantasia.
Yeah. Talk about it. But
Yeah.
here's the thing about aphantasia before you get there. The reason I never thought about this is because I can visualize. I have the ability to close my eyes and see a purple elephant or whatever. I mean, it's okay that not okay. I mean, it's something that I can just do. Now talk about it.
I
That.
cannot see a
Yeah.
purple elephant. I mean, like, so this is actually where it gets really challenging for me because I don't even understand what you mean by see an elephant.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so to me, I'm like seeing, like if I'm seeing, my eyes are open and like I'm seeing you, that's seeing. And but if I talk about it when I close my eyes and I imagine, I still use the word I see it,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I don't actually see it in my head.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things like it's dark. It's black.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it, I feel it, I can understand it, like I interpret it very easily. But with NLP, so much of the work, even the techniques, right? Even some of the techniques are specific on changing the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is this?
Yep.
So I have to change when I do that work. I have to shift the feeling. Like like there's no image that shifts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a technique, right, where a swish pattern where we move images back and forth, right? We move images around. I don't have those images to
Right.
move
Right.
around.
So let me stop for a second. So the what Crystal's talking about is in your mind, if you can see a picture of a purple elephant, close your eyes, see the purple elephant. Now you're going to switch that with a yellow dog. And so I can swish that. I can switch those two things because I'm seeing it when I close my eyes. But Crystal's saying she doesn't see that or doesn't know how to do this swish pattern because there's nothing to swish.
There's nothing to move around.
Right.
So I have a hard time. And so I found myself really challenged in doing these works, these techniques. Now, here's what I can tell you. There's all sorts of other things that go on behind the scene. And even though I don't have the visual picture, all of this stuff is extremely effective,
Right.
right? So even for someone with aphantasia, NLP is still very effective for me.
Mm-hmm.
However, I thought, what if it was so much easier because something else gave me the visual that I can easily see
Mm-hmm.
and did the challenging part for me, and I got to kind of relax a little bit and enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And so that was in my crux of going, I think VR might be extremely valuable. And also for people that don't have aphantasia, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people like video games. We learn better when things are fun,
Mm-hmm.
and your brain doesn't know the difference. right? So once you're like stuck up in this right here, especially if we put noise canceling headphones on you, your brain does not know you are not in reality.
Wow.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense. I will be honest, I've only done the VR thing maybe 2 or 3 times as kind of a parlor trick, at an event.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it wasn't like therapeutic, or it wasn't for any purpose except to experience it. And so I'm not an expert like you have become or are becoming in the way it works to rewire some of those patterns.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy
It's
and cool.
insane how it works. So I have one of my grandchildren is 4, and there is an ocean game. We have other VR headsets, not just mine, regular ones. And there's an ocean game where you can swim around in the ocean and you can pick the sea life. There's you pick one and then it shows up in your scene. And I'm gonna tell you, my granddaughter is crazy, just crazy. That's an understatement, but she's crazy. And my 4-year-old granddaughter wanted a shark. And so we picked the shark, and she's sitting next to me on the couch, and she goes, "Oh, there he is." And her little physical body started to shake.
Wow.
And I put my hand on her leg and I said, "It's not real or safe. It's okay. It's not real." But it was an amazing opportunity to see the brain's perception of what you see inside of a virtual reality headset and know that you're sitting on a couch.
Right, right.
It was so incredible. And even just, you know, kind of brought up the connotation of understanding what we can and can't do with it. I
Mm.
looked at my daughter and I said, what an amazing opportunity for us to let her continue to do this and teach her the difference between fear and danger.
Yeah. Oh,
Right?
good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Like to have to put her in an environment where her brain perceives that she's in danger, right?
Mhm.
But cognitively knowing that she is safe. And so as she continues to grow, get older, she's able to better distinguish between when she's really in should be scared
Right.
versus just when she's scared of something,
Sure.
right?
Oh,
Really
that's
in
so
danger,
good.
but just scared.
So yesterday, just so happens I spoke at an event and we talked about the things that keep us stuck. And the organization was an HR organization, and I was talking about building resilience in your leadership. And we talked about how there are only 2 kinds of fear, right? Which you're talking about right now. There is authentic fear, which is like I gotta run because there's a giant coming at me, or whatever. There's something chasing me. So that's authentic fear, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then there's inauthentic fear, and that's everything else that doesn't threaten my physical survival, but which I've learned over the course of my life does the same thing to me physically,
Yes.
right? So I love that distinction.
Yeah. I hope, I don't know. I do like research. Um, just because I think there's so many things we haven't explored. And I'll tell you, like, video games. Now, in fairness, I'm not a video gamer, and VR has really only come about because of this for me. So I'm not an expert in VR. I do like some lightsaber. I like figuring out patterns.
Yeah, yeah,
So a little bit of activity while I'm figuring out a pattern
sure.
is really cool. But I think there's so much untapped
Mhm.
that we can utilize these for from an emotional development standpoint that really we haven't even begun to scratch the surface yet. Right now, the majority of the softwares that exist are environments. So, like there's therapeutic um, virtual reality solutions right now that create the environment for you to be in. So, let's say you're a veteran and you have PTSD from war, right? So you can put on a virtual reality headset and your therapist can recreate a warlike environment. So it's exposure therapy where
Mm.
your therapist still has to work you through all of the therapeutic components, right? Still has to do therapy while you're just exposed. So they're working on desensitizing the people to the environments and shifting that.
Mhm.
And that's really cool. To me, the challenge with that is it's not scalable because it still relies on a person.
Mm.
And so one of my biggest things, like literally the whole scenario came about for Sheepdog. I had a friend of mine, and look, I love NLP. So
Can you talk I don't want anybody to lose that what NLP is.
yes,
So can we just jump in right here and explain NLP and then come back to your story?
we sure can.
So NLP, go ahead.
NLP, Neuro Linguistic Programming, and it really is the study and understanding of language and communication, but it works both internal and external, right? So it's how you communicate with yourself through pictures and words, and how you communicate with the world, as well as how the world communicates with you. So to me, it's a comprehensive understanding of language and communication.
Mhm.
And the most impactful part, because we talk a lot about communication, right? Communication.
Right.
And so if you're going to go learn communication, what you're going to learn is how to talk with other people. What we don't learn is how to talk to ourselves. And so we forget that, maybe not forget, maybe we don't even identify or have an awareness that there's already a person in there.
Mm.
And sometimes that person has its own ideas and agendas
Yep.
we're not really aware of.
Yep.
And so that internal conversation then begins with the ability to resolve conflict internally and to change the way you perceive things, belief systems, stuff like that. And so that's my take on NLP. What's yours?
Same. It's
Cool.
communication. It's getting not, I was going to say getting rid of. It's identifying those blocks, identifying the things that could occur to us as traumas or things that we made a decision about that we've forgotten.
Yeah,
And that's why I think the work that you're doing with the timeline, you might want to talk a little bit about that, the,
sure.
left and right, front and back. Um, I'm not certified in the stuff you're certified in. So
Right, right,
if you
right.
wanted to talk about some of the master techniques that can be enhanced with your technology, I think that'd be great.
Sure. So I'm going to be a little bit careful because there's some copyrights out there, and I absolutely was very diligent to make sure that I respected all of those copyrights out there. So we really do just focus on the timeline work, but the concept is based on your unconscious mind really knows everything already, right? We're just not cognitively aware of it. And so we utilize this notion that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jody, because it's been a hot minute since I've
Yeah,
said
yeah.
it, 2,000 bits of information per
2
second.
million.
2 million, thank you. 2 million bits of information per second that we're surrounded by, and we can only grab 126. 126, right?
Yep, correct.
Okay, cool. I always get the 6 and the 8 mixed up.
Yeah, no, you're right.
So, and we can only grab 126. And really, I think what that highlights is the capacity of our unconscious mind versus the capacity of our cognitive portion,
Okay.
right? And so when we're looking at, and so when people don't truly understand what it means when we talk about the unconscious mind, um, I normally will just ask them to either stop breathing or to stop their heart.
Yeah.
And of course, nobody can do that. And so then my next question then is, well, why do you think your heart beats? I mean, something's telling it to beat, right? Well, where is that?
Mhm.
And our current understanding is that the brain is the control center. So if the brain is the control center, it literally is telling your entire body what to do. That means there is programming there. And the fact that you cannot cognitively stop or consciously stop your heart proves the point that you don't have cognitive access to all of the programming that's in your unconscious mind.
Yeah.
And so I usually just utilize that just to help them understand the scope and the power that their unconscious mind does have, right?
Right.
And so for timeline, it's allowing your unconscious mind a voice to say, hey, this is where I want to go because this is where there is something that I want to address. And it's very, very generalized, especially in our software, right? Literally, you get up on your timeline and there's a line. So forward and backwards, to Jody's point, there are many different ways you can perceive time. Most people have a linear timeline, forward and backwards or left and right. So we have kind of definitely generalized into those. However, you do get to pick, right? If you close your eyes right now and point to your past, most people are going to either point behind them or to the left of them.
Right.
And so once you actually get above your timeline in our software, literally all you see are little dots on the timeline. So it's so generalized that it's a complete reliance on your subconscious mind to give meaning to what's on that timeline and to allow you to choose, or it'll direct you to choose whichever one it identifies is right,
Mm.
right? So it's really interesting because we're so used to solving problems consciously,
Yeah.
right? And this is such an unconscious movement that a lot of times people are like, well, I don't know. I don't know. And I'm like, that's cool. You
Mhm.
actually do.
Mhm.
And just pick one because
Right.
it's right.
Mhm.
So I think there's such a huge world for us as we continue to grow to begin to understand how to work with ourselves, that unconscious portion of our mind,
Mhm.
um, and listen, like actually listen, even when it doesn't make sense.
Right. Right. Well, it wouldn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. It actually couldn't make sense because, like to your point about bringing it to the conscious, which doesn't have language for that, and
Right.
so it can't. And I think once we can, like you said, let go of that, let go of the need to know everything, and let go of the control that we've been so programmed to have about everything. That's where, whew, just I talk to people a lot about allowing things to come to them, and they're like, "But I can't allow because that slows down, and I'm a mover and shaker."
Yes.
I get it, and it's like, because you've heard this too, but and you've if you've listened at all to this podcast, you know the difference between wanting to play with your dog and running after your dog. Your dog will go in the opposite direction. You have to stop and say, "Come, Rover," you know, and that's kind of what you're talking about when we can let go of the consciousness of this.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point you make. I kind of started to share a little bit earlier with you. So one of the so obviously Sheepdog. So the name of the software is called DisCOVReality. It's funny. I've started literally. You know how someone will write out how to phonetically say a word.
Yeah.
I've started putting the phonetics underneath it because it's people call it DisCOVReality because that's how it's spelled because it's
Oh,
just VR instead.
oh, perfect. Yeah, for sure.
So the software is called DisCOVReality. And what really, and I guess to finish out my story, my buddy came to me and again, I'm a huge NLP fan, but I don't think unless you've experienced it, at least I've never been able to do a really good job of articulating truly the impact that NLP can make.
Mm,
And so I had told him multiple times how amazing it was. And his girlfriend actually was a practitioner or is a practitioner as well. And his best friend was having some trouble and did a session with her. And he called me up afterwards and he was like, oh
mm,
my God. He's like, this stuff is incredible. I haven't seen him be this man for like 3 years. And it was just one session. And I was like, I know.
mhm,
I tried to tell you. And he said to me, it's not scalable because it takes you guys. And there's not
mm,
very many of you. How do we make it scalable?
mm.
Said, well, I've been telling you for a while that it's software. So I'm just going to tell you one more time. It's software. That's the only way for us to make it scalable is to take out part of that human element. So what I can say about DisCOVReality is it doesn't replace the need for a therapist at all, right? Or a coach or a practitioner. It doesn't replace that because right now it's solely focused on just resolving negative emotions. And really it was because like we saw it really happen in COVID where it was months before you could get in to see somebody, like months. And I was like, if people can just instead of this doesn't really work in COVID because right now our software is proctored. And so you still have to go somewhere to actually go through a session, but you don't have to talk. I mean, if an office has 10 headsets or a campus has 10 headsets or whatever, whoever it is, if they have 10 headsets, 10 people can simultaneously put these on and go through a session. Nobody has to be there to do therapy. The proctor is just to make sure that no one has any trouble. And if there's any challenges from an emotional standpoint during the session, like if they just end the session without going through the resolution, that there's just someone to
Mm,
help them get through that. But it does create some level of scalability without replacing the need for coaches, practitioners, or therapists.
yeah.
Um, so that's kind of how it really came about. And to your point of like allowing things, that's one of my things right now. So I'm in this process of getting clear on really what my plan is, right? And I love LinkedIn, by the way. That's how we stay in contact, right? Is LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn, and I'm figuring out how to marry all of the pieces of me into morphing those together. And one of the one of the pieces about me that I've started to become more vocal about is my neurodivergence. And as a neurodivergent woman in a professional environment, there are so many different avenues that we can go down.
Yep.
One of the things that I have a hard time with is balance. So I tend to be an extremist. So I'm either really on, really hyper focused. I tend to get stuff done really fast, or I'm off and I don't even hear what you said. And so I'm trying to figure out how to balance that with this concept of allowing, because I want to drive. And I'm learning how to allow at the same time, being open and not needing to know what that has to look like. One of the things that I really have learned, diagnosis is a hard term. I actually don't like that term because I don't really have a label. What I have is an awareness. And my awareness, I heard this was actually the best analogy for me, because I resisted even talking. So I have a therapist. I hope everybody has a therapist, because there should always have a therapist, whether anything's wrong or not. And when we first started talking about it, I was like, I don't want to do this because I don't want a label. I don't want an excuse, because that's what it was to me. It was an excuse to be different. And she just reminded me that it's not an excuse to understand who you are, so that if there are tools that can help you, or if there is a way to express to someone something. So I'll tell you, my driver's license says that I wear corrective lenses, right? And I promise you don't want me driving without my glasses.
Right.
So imagine if I had never gone to the eye doctor because I didn't want a label, or if I had never had an eye test because I felt like that was an excuse because I wasn't seeing 20/20, right? And so that was, when I heard that analogy, I was like, okay, this makes sense. So it really has helped me reframe neurodiverse brains and the people that, I don't know. Anyhow, so I don't totally understand it because I'm neurodivergent.
Yeah.
I don't understand what neurotypical is. I don't really know what that means. But I
because you've always been you, probably.
always been me.
Right.
And I didn't know there was anything different.
Right.
Until somebody told me there was. And then I had to start looking for differences to understand.
Yeah.
But what it also helped me understand is that I had created myself to appear as somebody that was normal. I promise I am not.
Well, so when you say normal like that it occurs that you're talking about yourself as abnormal, and I don't think that's what you mean. What do you mean by normal?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So neurotypical versus neurodivergent, right? I call neurotypical people normal because that was always what I was under the impression I needed to be in order to survive, right? It's even after all of this has come out, right? I look back on my childhood and I'm like, oh my gosh, I had a tic. And I remember my dad was not okay with the tic that I had.
Oh, wow.
And I remember I was probably 7 years old. And I remember sitting at the dinner table and he had my tic, I would clear my throat like every couple of minutes. I can imagine it was very annoying. And, but I remember thinking to myself after he'd gotten on me again, I remember just thinking, I don't know how to stop. And like, that's one of those things that stuck out in my mind, even today, right? Because I'm like, I don't know what I did or how I did it. I clearly stopped. But I just remember feeling so helpless at that moment because I didn't know what to do. And if I didn't do it, I was just going to get my ass whipped over and over and over again. Right.
Mhm.
And so I kind of look at that. And I look at, and my mom was very, well, all sorts of different things, but there were some times where she was just really understanding. I remember hearing when I was younger, I would only eat macaroni and cheese out of a certain bowl for every meal. And
Mhm.
like,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I appreciate that she accommodated that, right? So I look back on the things that I went through as a child and then really what I thought I had to do as an adult um to fit in. And I
Mm.
say fit in because like, I process I'm a verbal processor,
Mhm.
but people get irritated by me processing verbally,
Mm.
right? I hyper focus on things, and so I move really fast, and it drives people insane because I just go.
Mhm.
And so um, I am very literal. Actually, I had somebody call me this morning, and I said, "How are you doing?" And she's like, "Oh, great." And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." She goes, "That was sarcasm." So
Mm.
I miss I miss things like that.
Okay. Uh-huh.
I'm very blunt and direct,
Mhm.
and to a lot of what I would consider a normal person, that's harsh.
Mm.
But I'm not trying to be harsh.
Mhm.
I'm just direct, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you take those, Jody, and you put those in a corporate environment,
Mm.
it can be a challenge,
Mm.
right? And so I either talk too much or I don't talk at all.
Mhm.
And people just don't really know what to do with that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so, what has really come out for me, one of my passions that's kind of like melding into all of this is I clearly learned how to mask,
Mhm.
and now I'm learning how to unmask.
Mhm. Mhm.
And with all of the tools and techniques that I've learned along the way, including NLP, I am learning how to navigate and reprogram some of it, right? In the ability to be okay being who I am when for the rest of my life I didn't think that was okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well,
So
this
it's really
is
cool.
not this deep. I love that you've explained this. This is not why Get Real was born, but it fits
Okay, so sorry.
perfectly. No, no, no. It fits perfectly in this. And I think part of it is perhaps because I didn't know the things you know about yourself. I didn't know the things about myself.
Yeah.
2020, this podcast was born, and the whole Get Real brand was born. And the idea was during COVID, especially, we were shut up in our own rooms by ourselves, right? We couldn't do things. And I think that drove people crazy if they were locked in with their own thoughts. Because at that point, you have to start, making some sense of things, or like you said, start understanding that normal isn't the only way to be, the way you've just
Yes.
described it, right? So it fits perfectly what you're describing about yourself. And as you're saying that about yourself, I'm thinking I'm neurodivergent. I'm sure there are things just like
Yes.
that because I felt like I didn't fit in. The only
Yes.
way I could fit in was to shave off the square corners of me to fit into the round holes that everybody else seemed to figure out.
Yes. And my favorite group to work with, so I've had the privilege of coaching and mentoring and training young sales professionals. And I love the neurodivergence because like our youngest one was 23. That's mind blowing to me, but usually 24 to 28. And I watch them so consumed by what everyone else thought, right? And I watched it shift and shape how they showed up.
Mhm.
And I can see another side of them.
Mhm.
And I know from experience that when you're able to drop the people pleasing side
Mhm.
and be who you are, you go so much further because that's authentic,
Yeah.
right? Because you're not held back. And to your point, I hope all of us, because none of this existed when we were young, right? Nobody
Right,
knew about this shit.
right, right.
So we grew up just thinking that this is the way that it is.
Mhm.
And even when I started to realize like the point that sent me to therapy to try and figure this out was actually in the beginning stages of DISCOVReality, and which I love talking about. Like this, that's my baby, like that's my baby passion, right?
But,
And so I had so much fun making it. I love business. I love processes. I love operations. I love structure. Like I loved all of this and the creative side, right? And so I basically approached it with a blank check and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And I did, and I ran and I challenged myself and I broke through so many glass ceilings that I had had, and I pushed myself outside of comfort zones and just all of this stuff. And it was so exhilarating. And then I went back to my corporate job and I realized like I was really having a hard time
mm,
communication with those people.
mm,
And I went to my therapist and I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I can't get this figured out, I'm going to get fired.
mm,
Like I can't communicate with my
mm,
superiors. And when they talk to me, I think they say, I think this is what they mean, but then I find out that's not what they meant. I completely misinterpreted it. And I'm like, you got to help or I'm going to get fired.
mhm,
And, as we were talking about this, I started telling her about DISCOVReality. And all of a sudden she looked at me and she goes, that's what did it. And
mm,
I just said, what? And she said, you allowed yourself while you created DISCOVReality to be who you are.
mm,
And then you went back to try and be the person you had created yourself to be. And
mm,
what had happened is you had enough time being who you are that it created a wider divide between going back to who you had created yourself to be, and it became more and more challenging.
mhm,
I was like, I had never looked at it that way. And it totally made sense.
yeah,
Yes. So when I say like there's just so much that's come out of creating DISCOVReality, not just for me,
right,
for I should say not just for everyone else,
right, but for you.
how much has come out of it for me too. Yeah, it's been incredible.
Oh, I have a friend who, you're just reminding me, she's very, very successful doctor. And it didn't occur to her till she started working with a therapist that there was this thing called empathy. And she just thought everybody was, and it was hard for me to hear that at first because she was being honest with me and telling me these things. And I was like, but doesn't everybody no.
No.
And oh my gosh, that was fascinating to me. She asked me a question. She said, have you now said everything you wanted to say? And I'm like, that seems like a really weird question to ask. And she said, did you notice that I asked that question? Because I'm being trained how to ask that question. Because it
Yes.
doesn't occur to me to ask that question on my own.
Yes.
Is
And
that,
because we jump right in.
yeah, is that similar to you?
So I phrase it a little bit different. I just say, are you complete? Or
Mm,
are you like I will say, are you finished? Because those are words that make sense to somebody.
sure.
I have to be careful contextually asking that, are you finished?
Right.
Right? And sometimes that can be like, no, I wasn't finished. And I'm just
Mm-hmm. Mm,
like, and that's when I'm like, wait. I didn't mean it bad. I'm
mhm,
really truly trying to
mhm.
understand. And I have to tell you, my husband is a saint and he understands this side of me because when you say something to me, I'm going to ask questions like, help me understand what you mean by that.
Mm,
Or
mm,
tell me specifically, do you mean that if this is the case, then this can't be the case?
mhm.
And people sometimes are like, no, that's not. And my husband goes, she really is trying to understand.
Wow. So you said he's always known you that way, right? Before
Oh,
you
yeah.
had this aha.
Yeah.
So there's something in that connection with him. Has it enhanced your relationship since you've been able to maybe articulate it differently?
I think so. Whether he'll acknowledge it or not,
I should ask him.
he's also neurodivergent.
Oh, okay. Does
Um,
you said whether he acknowledges that or
yeah,
not.
whether he acknowledges it or not, he's also neurodivergent.
Okay.
But it has been really cool because I think through me, by me pointing things out, he has been able to recognize some things in himself as well.
Mhm,
Uh, he used to just say that he was high maintenance, right? Like, and I will tell you this, because of how I was raised, I learned a lot of coping skills to handle all of my internal feelings. So I will say this, one of the things that does irk me, and this can be from ignorance at this point, but somebody will probably call me on it at some point. I disagree with what we determine right now as on the spectrum or not. Because in order to be on the spectrum per se, you have to exhibit behaviors that would fall as autistic behavior. Well, I don't.
Mhm.
And it's not because I don't have them, it's because I don't do them.
Mm.
So what is irritating about it for me is my brain is still wired that way.
Yeah.
Just because I learned how to filter it and to behave differently didn't make it go away.
Mm.
So to have somebody, and like I said, I'm not looking at this as a label. I don't need anybody to go, oh, she's autistic. I'm looking just for more of an understanding,
Mm.
right? And if I just translate it to the eyesight parallel, it's okay that somebody sees you have glasses, right? However, if they never knew that you had glasses and they expected you to be able to see things, it might be frustrating.
Mhm.
And so for me, it really is just about the awareness. There's nothing I need you to do differently. Just understand that my eyesight's not the same.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to accommodate anything for me. However, when I am different, understand there's a reason why.
Yeah.
Um,
So what I see in that, when I'm thinking about the world of people who are nowhere near as self-aware as you are,
right.
um, this conversation is fun to have because I'm owning me, you're owning you, and both of us can say, tell me more because this is why. The world out there doesn't seem to care about anybody else's neurodivergence or way of seeing the world, at least, generally. It's my way or the highway, especially as we talk about political conversations right
Oh,
now. And what if we had the opportunity to say, can you tell me more? Because I'm really interested and I really do want to understand this. Like you said, your husband is your mediator sometimes. She really does want. I get that it takes time, and it might take time up front that saves relationships and saves a lot in the long run.
right.
So I would love to have these kinds of conversations with people who piss me off
Yes.
because I'd learned something.
Yes, it's interesting that you say that. So I'm huge into conflict resolution, right?
Mhm.
Because so by the way, I do see the world very black and white. I understand what gray is, but the way I see it is black and white.
Mhm.
And so when you have two people that are in some level of conflict, it's typically because they have different perspectives,
Mhm.
right? And so our challenge is we do a very poor job as a culture of discussing differences. What we do, how we typically approach it is we try and change somebody's mind to our perspective.
Right, right.
And so if you look at that, whether that's politics, whether that's the dog, whether it's the color of your car, almost all conflict comes from this horrible, like horrible habit that I need you to be on my side. I need you to believe what I believe in order for us to move forward. And it doesn't have to be that, but I normally say but this is a but, Jody.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But if you can't own your own shit, like Jody, it's okay if we both have different beliefs. And if I can't be okay with that, I'll never be able to have one of those conversations with you where I get to hear your perspective,
Mhm.
where I get to see the world through your lens.
Mhm.
And I don't have to agree with it. That's okay.
Mhm.
But if I can't own the fact that I have my belief system and I'm okay with you not having mine, man, we have such, it's just so challenging with, I don't even know really the cause. Well, I think there's probably a lot of them that we could start to weed through, but there's just such an emotional attachment to this idea or notion that I need you to believe what I believe.
Right. Well, and I think what I'm kind of playing around with some of my clients and even me is what is the outcome that I prefer? What is my desired outcome in the
Yes.
relationship? Is it a connection or is it to be right? And so for me, I'm listeners, please bear with me again because I talk about this book on almost every podcast episode. But the book is called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And in that book, they just break it down so simply to conscious leadership or unconscious leadership. And conscious is being open, curious, and committed to learning. Unconscious is closed, defensive, and committed to being right. And so even in that black and white world, that way you see it, and you said, I understand gray, but I don't see gray. It feels to me like that's a conscious way of looking at it, right? So
Really.
for me, more than anything else, my desired outcome is connection. So I'm willing to not have you believe the way I believe if we can be friends and talk about it.
Right.
And then, go
My
ahead.
question to you then says, Jody, why do you believe yours is right and mine is wrong?
I don't believe right and wrong, right? I believe,
Absolutely.
right? So then the
Yeah.
whole thing is, like
Yeah.
you said, it's a whole other conversation then,
A
right?
whole different,
Because,
yeah. And so
right.
I will typically actually ask that question,
Hmm.
not to cause more conflict,
Right, right.
because I'm really curious.
Yeah. Well, and it'll occur as defensive, right? So then if I get defensive about it, because you say, well, how do you know yours is right? I have to go to myself. Did I just get defensive in my jaw or my shoulders? She's challenging my belief. Urgh. And then I have to go, oops, went unconscious for a second,
Yeah.
come back to consciousness and be curious. So it's work. It's
Yeah,
work. But to me, it's worth it because the relationship is worth it.
I agree.
And there are times when I have to be willing to give up my need to be right, even if I'm accurate.
Yes, I like that term. I think there is, so I once had someone tell me that, because there's a saying that perception is reality, right?
Mhm.
And he challenged that. And he said perception isn't reality, fact is reality.
Okay.
And I see where he's at.
Mhm.
I can understand, right? Like, if I don't perceive that we're on a video chat right now or video call right now, is that reality?
Mhm.
And so the fact is we are,
Mhm.
therefore reality is that we're on a video call. However, regardless of what the fact is, if I truly define it differently, my reality is what my definition is.
Mhm.
And so while I do understand what he said, I do also look at like schizophrenics,
Mhm.
right? I do look at people that truly have a different lens of the world, and therefore their reality is different. Um, I peruse social media on occasion, like other social medias. And so I happened upon Instagram, maybe, I don't know, it was a story, and this girl was just cracking up. And she said, I'm schizophrenic and I work at a restaurant. And when I was cleaning up, I saw a sample on the floor. And she said, I'm literally dying right now because I'm trying to figure out which customer that I thought I handed the sample to wasn't real.
Oh, wow. That takes it to a whole different level.
Right?
Wow.
So therefore, is
The
perception
reality.
reality?
Hmm. Yep.
Even though,
She's self-aware enough to know that she
yes,
sees
yes,
things, yeah, that aren't there. Oh my goodness. Wow. We're not going to lose you listeners. We're not going to go down that much of a rabbit trail,
not
but
gonna go down that road. No,
But
no,
let's
no.
bring it back for a second, though, Crystal, because what you're talking about, virtual reality, actually sets it up for someone to be able, like you said earlier, to be able to see something. When you're doing this, it's not real. You're talking about your granddaughter and the shark. It's not real like reality, but it's real to your senses.
Right.
So you can determine whether we could go back to NLP and we could talk about getting over phobias or things like that, right? It's not real that you're going to get swallowed up by water every time you step in the shower. But if you have this thing that water is scary, then is there a way we can help you get beyond that?
Sure, absolutely, right. And I love how you brought it back in the understanding that, so I'll just challenge him and I'll say, yes, perception is reality to the individual. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean it's reality to the rest of the world.
Sure.
It just means that it is to the person.
Right.
That is what makes virtual reality so effective,
Mhm.
depending upon what you're doing with it, right? And so in this specific instance, and I'm excited, I'm getting ready to dive down some pathways of research with it, really to understand the impact on the brain, both physiologically and both perceived. And so in doing that, I'm truly excited just at this, because what we've created is kind of the first step, right? It really is the first of its kind. There's nothing else out there that's doing this, unless anyone else out there knows. And if you do, please let Jody know so I can know, because I
There you
have.
go. Yes.
So if anybody knows,
We want to.
but there's other levels, right? There's so much more that we can still do that will allow people to continue to utilize virtual reality in a way that does help. We really just have a shortage of help right now, right? And I think that's kind of actually everywhere. It's not just specific mental health. And I have to be careful. We don't do mental health, right? We're just an emotional wellness platform. But it's intended to help support the mental health. One of the things we're looking at doing is colleges, right? I just had a discussion with a college around the number of students that have anxiety because
Yeah.
they're coming in, even like vets that are coming in or military spouses that are coming in. And one of the other things we talked about was sports, right? The anxiety around performance in the sports teams that they have. And this college lost almost all of their athletes. Almost all of their athletes transferred out. And so being able to look at how can we help students and the sports players, how can we help them feel better? Not necessarily from a therapeutic standpoint, but how can you go take that test and be more effective on your test just because you don't have the anxiety that you had, right?
Yeah.
Those types of scenarios where this allows a lot of people all at one time without having to create an additional staff load from either a profession or, from an employer. And I think we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, I agree. I agree. This is fascinating. So how can people get a hold of you, Crystal? If they've heard something they want to know more about, what's the best way to find you?
So you absolutely can find me on LinkedIn, Crystal Chambers. My website is sheepdogtherapeutics.com. And the most simple way that you can reach me is with my phone number that is actually listed in my profile on LinkedIn. And so if you can't, I'm certain everybody knows how to get a hold of Jody.
You'll find me. We'll
You'll
do this.
Yeah.
Because I really think this is next level, and especially at the very end when you were just talking about anxiety, depression, those kinds of things that show up a lot in student populations. This could be a really great offering for them. I love that. I thought about it. So many places to go.
So many. Yeah. So as we close out, what we're focused on right now are students, sports players, first responders, veterans, and then obviously working with therapists and their clients as well. So that's our initial focus right now.
Awesome. Awesome. Oh, thank you, Crystal, so much for sharing this and for getting back in touch with me. And
Absolutely.
it's so awesome how once you make connections, those connections are there. We haven't talked for a while, but we spent some quality time together a couple of years ago. So very cool. Very, very grateful for you and the work you're doing. And I'm so happy to be able to support you. So thank you for being with me.
My pleasure.
And everybody, as always, just go get real. See if you can get out there this week and do something that shows the world who you really are. And that's the best thing you could do for yourself and the world. Thanks, everybody. Okay, stop.